In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Let's continue with plate tectonics. And remember, tectonics, the concept of tectonics is a relatively new idea. It's only been around a little over 100 years. Mankind didn't know about it before. We knew about earthquakes, we knew about volcanoes and that sort of thing, but we didn't know what was underlying all that and what the principal cause of that was. And certainly nobody ever thought about continental drift. That was a foreign idea until fairly recently. But we know that the Earth is made up of the kind of layers. I said you have to think of an onion to get the concept. And at the center of it all is this core. And we know from high school and junior high that the core is, molten hot, radioactive material going on in the center of it. And then you have the outside part is the crust, and then right under the crust is the mantle. And the continents sit on top of this crust, which is also on the mantle. And we know now that continents move. And so the interior of the Earth is very radioactive, produces quite a bit of heat. And as the heat then rises to the surface, it creates liquid rock. And kind of like boiling water, this viscous upper mantle rises and moves parallel to the surface for many distances. And then when cooled, settles down into the depths of the ocean. And these gigantic cells carry this thin, brittle outer layer of the crust, and also known as plates, and hence our term plate tectonics. These plates then lie on a bed of decreased viscosity. And so that viscosity allows for the movement. Now, obviously, this isn't quick movement. We don't see this with the visible eye until something major occurs, like an earthquake eventually, but there's movement. And I don't think anybody can deny that, when an earthquake occurs, there's significant change in the tomography of the landscape. Is that not right? I mean, think about what happened with the Great Tsunami. That was the result of an earthquake that occurred at the bed of the water. And so things change. Continents then begin to drift in the concept of plate tectonics. Subduction zones, which are zones that are kind of plunging, one plate going underneath another, are along straight regions down into the Earth, and when colliding together produce mountain ranges. And these ranges are the result of collisions of plates, buckling, and crumpling. There's basically three principles on how tectonics, or how the Earth is transformed or moved. One is extension, and that's just the idea of continents moving apart from each other. That's the continental drift. And that can actually literally be measured, still can be measured. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's not a very big rate. We're only talking about a few inches a year, but there is a rate that can be measured. Then you have transform faulting, and that's kind of slippage along a fault line. That would be primarily where you would see things like earthquake. And then there's compression, and then compression then is subduction zones that we talked about here in this slide, and that's one plate plunging beneath another plate. And we have kind of a picture of that right here. This all produces volcanoes, it produces earthquake, it produces movement in the crust, it produces catastrophic things when they occur. The important thing to know, and again, this is the picture, you can look at that at your leisure, but it shows subduction going on, it shows the spreading going on, the transforming going on that occurs in plate tectonics. But plate tectonics are not a bad thing, and that's the purpose of showing in the books Rare Earth and Privileged Planet that tectonics has a beneficial effect on the planet. Briefly though, volcanoes occur along subduction zones. And because magma is lower in density than basalt, since magma is of lower density than basalt, new rocks are formed by volcanoes, which in turn produce mountains. Volcanoes produce mountains. That's not big shattering news, is it? There's been new islands created, in our lifetime in the Pacific by volcanoes that occurred. How does that occur? By this formation of rock. Plates interact with each other by spreading at the center, by grinding by each other and colliding with each other, which in turn produces earthquakes and volcanoes. Now, not all mountain ranges are produced by volcanoes, but a lot of mountain ranges are. You go out to West Texas, go out to Arizona, see a lot of those mountain ranges. Those are volcanic mountain ranges. But that's not how all the mountain ranges occur. A lot of them occurred due to this compression or subduction that occurs. And again, You can see evidence of this all over the globe. You know, these trenches that occur way down deep in the ocean. This is talking about the East Aleutian volcanic arc and the subduction zone. And there's evidences for this all over our world. So what's the importance? Plate tectonics are felt to be responsible for the production of continents. Did you know that? At one time, it was felt that our Earth was one massive continent. And the process of plate tectonics probably influenced, in my opinion, by the great flood of the Bible. This landmass began to separate and drift or sprint if you are a young Earth creationist. Because tectonics, right now those plates are drifting very, very slow. There would not be enough time if the Earth was only 10,000 years old for us to have the continents that we had today if they were drifting at the rate they're drifting at now. Something catastrophic had to happen, and I believe that catastrophic thing was the flood. And so we like to use the word continental sprint, not continental drift. We see drift now. At one time those continents, and I don't know for sure if those continents were all together at one time. I think we have a picture coming up in a minute. But that's the thought. And that is not an anti-Bible concept. That could have been, the Bible doesn't, and in fact there's some evidence we're going to talk about in just a second, that maybe the earth was one big continent at one time. But you sort of see evidence when you look at the continents. If you look, and this isn't a good picture for that, but get a globe and look at Africa and look at South America. And if you put South America and Africa together, they sort of fit like a jigsaw puzzle. They really do. And there's other parts of the world that do the same thing. Now, this is somebody's representation as what that one landmass used to look like. And there's a name for that, and it's called Pangea. And that's what the thought was. And there may have been this one big land mass at one time that was our Earth. And then after the flood, I believe, then these continents would have started to separate. But it wasn't a drift, it was a sprint. So what's the benefit? Is there a benefit? Okay, maybe this happens, maybe it don't happen, but we know tectonics are going on now. That we know for sure. That's not debated by any of the young Earth creationists that I know of. They don't debate that. And we're talking about geologists, talking about people that have knowledge in this area. They don't debate the concept that there's tectonics. The debate might be on the sprint or the drift. I'm sure there would be great debate on that. But plate tectonics allow for one, a divergence of habitats. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but there's a great benefit. Plate tectonics are responsible for volcanism, but volcanism also produces more tectonics. The dynamics, kind of an interplay with them. So there's this interplay where volcanism and plate tectonics, and that plate tectonics can produce volcanism, but volcanism in turn can produce movement or plate tectonics. So if plate tectonics stopped, the Earth would essentially lose its continents due to erosion. Now, it would take a long time. I mentioned this last week. But over the period of time, we would lose our continents. There's enough water in the oceans right now to be able to cover the entire landmass if that landmass was flat. We would be all underneath water. You need mountains, believe it or not. Yeah, we live near the sea where we're almost at sea level. But if we didn't have mountains in our country and in the world, you would not have a dry earth. You would have nothing but a wet earth. So it is responsible. And if it didn't continue to occur, you would eventually lose those mountain ranges over time. In addition to this, and this is probably one of the most important things that tectonics does, and there's a carbon dioxide cycle that occurs in our Earth. And carbon dioxide, which is removed from the atmosphere by weathering, which is further produced by tectonics, would cease. And if you had carbon dioxide ceasing to exist, what you would have would be opposite from what we're worried about right now, which is the greenhouse effect, which is global warming. That's what we all hear about, right? If you lost all the carbon dioxide, you would have the opposite. You would have global freezing. You would have a completely frozen planet. We need that carbon dioxide. Now, we don't need to produce too much of it. We don't need to produce such a big carbon plate, a carbon footprint that we have global warming. And by the way, there's some recent evidence that says that's, if you believe in that or not, seems to be that it's slowing down some. And that, I'm not going to go through this slide. I mean, it's all about the dynamic of carbon dioxide and how that plays out. So there's a thermoregulatory process going on with plate tectonics. The temperature of our planet is very much It's critical that we have this interplay between plate tectonics and helping maintain important greenhouses like water, ozone, losing our ozone layer, you heard of that, CO2, and methane. Greenhouse gas composition and thus planetary temperature are byproducts of complex interactions among a planet's interior surface and atmosphere. That's Brownlee and Ward from Rare Earth. And these are not creationists. And so plate tectonics are also responsible for recycling minerals and chemicals locked up in the planet's sedimentary rocks. That occurs because of this movement. The CO2 rock weathering cycle is key in maintaining the Earth's temperature, and it's not known to occur anywhere else in the universe. Any planets we've seen so far, this has not been seen to occur. Again, this is part of that cycle. A significant portion of carbon dioxide is produced into the atmosphere by volcanoes and then taken out through limestone formation, thus creating this real delicate balance. It's real important, believe it or not, that we do have volcanoes and earthquakes. Sounds contradictory, but it does. Now, probably the most important thing about tectonics is the magnetic field. The Earth has a magnetic field. I think we all know that, right? It has a magnetic field. Is it important that we have a magnetic field? Yes, we probably wouldn't be here today if you didn't have a magnetic field. For various reasons, but also to protect us against cosmic radiation. Guess what produces the magnetic field? Plate tectonics to a large extent. If you didn't have plate tectonics and have this big, massive core inside that's bubbling off radioactivity, and then the movement that occurs as a result of that, we probably wouldn't have a magnetic field. Plus the spinning of the Earth produces a magnetic field. Very important thing that tectonics does. So our magnetic field reduces sputtering of the atmosphere, and it protects us from serious cosmic radiation that is reflected from the Earth because of magnetism. And I just pointed out here, for subduction to occur, you need water. Subduction usually occurs in the oceans. That's where subduction occurs. You need to have water to do that. And I think it's interesting that the Bible has talked about water always being here. And that's what Guillermo Gonzalez says in his book as well, Privileged Planet. Well, there's always been water on the Earth. Now here's the question. We talked about this briefly, but let's the kind of the elephant in the room, if you will. If you believe in continental drift, you believe that really happens, and you believe that tectonics is responsible for continental drift, and continental drift is a very, 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 very slow process. How could we be thousands of miles away from Africa if the Earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old? So the problem is, do plate tectonics prove an old Earth? Here's the rate of drift. I think I got it right, but it's here now. It's anywhere from 0.5 to 6 inches per year. I don't know how they measure that. Somebody has figured out how to do it, not me, obviously, but they've measured it, and it seems to be the rate of drift that we see as far as this extension effect of tectonics is seen. Now, if you use uniformitarian assumption, 100 million years would be required for the ocean basins and mountain ranges to form, if you believe in uniformitarianism. What is uniformitarianism? Do y'all remember? We talked about this, but it's been a long time. Easy way to say it is what's going on now has always gone on like it is even millions of years ago. Nothing has changed. Kind of the opposite of the catastrophic approach. But if you believe that, then you would have to surmise that the Earth has to be at least 100 million years old, and they believe the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So there would have been plenty of time for plate tectonics if you have uniformitarianism as your belief system. But there's many observations that are incompatible with a slow, gradual plate tectonics, and we're going to briefly look at them. So even though that seems, well, that's a pretty hard one to hard to argue with, there's some things that just don't fit, and a lot of this comes from Danny Faulkner, astrophysicist, and some other people that we've mentioned in this class before. The magnetic polarity changes rapidly and erratically in drill holes. That shouldn't have been, that if tectonics is a slow thing, you shouldn't see evidence of our past history that the magnetic fields have changed rapidly. But when they drill holes down in the crust, they can see that there's evidence of very rapidly changing magnetic fields. You wouldn't expect that from a uniformitarian concept. The floor of the Peru, Chile, and East Aleutian trenches are covered with soft, flat-lying sediments devoid of compression structures. Doesn't appear as if it's something that took a long time to form. Furthermore, catastrophic tectonics explains better how cold, rigid crustal plates could have moved thousands of miles over the mantle while the ocean floor subducted. There's no good explanation for that in uniformitarian from a uniformitarian point of view. So you have what appears to be these large, cold, rigid crustal plates moving thousands of miles, but yet while the ocean floor is subducted, and it isn't explained by plate tectonics. Also, we see rapid reversals of continental lava flows caused by astonishing rapid magnetic reversals. Part of the again idea that it didn't occur all that slowly. It could have been very rapid. Is it a biblical concept? Is plate tectonics a biblical concept? Well, you won't read about plate tectonics in your Bible, per se. But we're going to look at a few scriptures here that seem to indicate there may be some validity to that. And if you have your Bibles handy, you might want to turn to this. I've got this scripture on the screen. But Genesis 1, 9, 10 seems to suggest there may have been one land mass when you read it. Doesn't necessitate it, but seems to imply it. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear," and it was so. Maybe one big land mass. And God called the dry land earth, and the gatherings of the water he called seas, and God saw that this was good. So there is at least some implication that maybe there was at one time one gigantic land mass on earth. So when was it divided? That becomes a question. If there was only one land mass, when does the Bible talk about the land being divided? Turn to Genesis 10:25, because some people think this is where it occurred. And two sons were born to Eber, and the name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. So if you ever heard of this idea of during Peleg, the earth was divided, some use this scripture as that. But that's probably not where it was divided, because this probably has more to do with the dividing of nations than it does earth or land masses. And it just doesn't fit. Look at Genesis 7 and 11. I think the more likely time that the earth was divided and continents began to form was during the flood. And we know that, you think about it, there was a movie that came out last year and of course it's a goofy movie, but as far as the special effects, I think it was kind of nice. The idea of the water springing from the earth, that was in that movie, and the Bible talks about that. And we're going to look at the flood in some detail later on in this study. But you have to admit that a worldwide flood, raining 40 days and 40 nights, having the water springing up from the earth, had to be a major catastrophic event at the very least, and would have caused massive change throughout the earth. Verse 11 of chapter 7, this is Noah and the flood. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month on the 17th day, that's very specific, by the way. So the idea that the flood is allegorical or mythical, why would it be that specific if it was? It actually gives you the time. But at this time, on the same day, all the fountains of the deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were open, and the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Again in verse 2 of chapter 8, and the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed. So all this is going on continuously. And this water's coming up and the water's coming down continuously for 40 days and 40 nights. It's going to produce a massive effect on the continents. And I believe that's when it occurred. They were opened up, 40 days later they were closed. And I believe at that point the continents began to drift. Can anybody prove that? No, you can't prove it. These are things that are historical. You can try to gather evidence, and there's just as much evidence for a continental sprint as there is for continental drift, and maybe even more so. Now, interestingly, and I think Brownlee and Ward conveniently left this out of their book, Rare Earth. They start from a different point of view. But the idea of continents drifting apart and being part of one landmass is a creationist idea, not a scientist idea. A fellow by the name of Antonio Snyder Pellegrini. Sometimes you'll only see Antonio Snyder, but his name is Antonio Snyder Pellegrini, and we changed that in the slide tonight. So we need to be corrected on the slide for YouTube, but his name is Antonio Snyder Pellegrini, and in 1859 he proposed that the earth used to be one big land mass. He was looking at various evidences, scientific evidences, also looking at the Bible itself, and he published his work in 1859. What is familiar about that year? You get extra credit if you know this. You've been listening. Thank you. The same time The Origin of the Species was published, was 1859. His book was written in French. Didn't make it over to the United States and wasn't read very much and was basically completely ignored until the 20th century. And then people started saying, well, I think there could have been, could be something to this. Of course, they took their own credit for it, never giving Snyder Pellegrini his credit, but it was a creationist who come up with this idea. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion are plate tectonics are real and consistent with the biblical account, and without them, our planet would be much less habitable at the least, even though when these catastrophic things occur, they seem to be like the whole earth is going to be destroyed, but they're not. But when we've seen this kind of stuff, we'll look at this too later on. Remember, most of you probably were alive when it was St. Helena? Is that St. Helen? St. Helens. When it exploded? If you know what that did to the landscape, it don't look anything like it did before. And we saw the great tsunami a few years ago, and all these were part of this mass movement that occurs on our earth. So they're real, and to deny them, you just might as well deny that the moon exists. But you don't have to be afraid of the idea. They can be explained from a biblical point of view. All right, now we're going to change tunes a little bit because I do want to try to get through this. We've given ample evidence that our universe and our earth is extremely fine-tuned. Does anybody doubt that? One expression is it's like on a razor's edge. It's so fine-tuned. Everything has to be just like it is, and the parameters have to be just like they are. Even the constants, the speed of light and the magnetic factor and all those have to be exactly where they are, or we would not exist. And that seems to be purposeful from my point of view. Seems to be there was a purpose through it. So what do naturalists say about that? Virtually all the scientists, whether believers or not, talking about Bible believers or not, they understand this. They understand how fine-tuned the universe is. So what's their explanation for it? Does it matter? And we started this class by asking the question, does all this fine-tuning really matter? They don't deny it. Believe it or not, they probably wouldn't deny anything really in Rare Earth, wouldn't deny too much in Privileged Planet, except for the conclusions in Privileged Planet, that there has a design associated with all this. But they understand that the earth and the universe is fine-tuned. That's not the question. They know it's fine-tuned. So what's their answer? And they know about the habitable zone. They know we're in a special place in the universe. They understand it better now than we used to, and it's beginning to look like there's something special about us. Now, most scientists would still say we're going to find life in other places. But what's their answer? Patrick Glenn, in the book God Evidence, says, all the seemingly arbitrary and unrelated constants in physics have one thing in common. They are precisely the values you need if you want to have a universe capable of producing life. That's what seems to be in common with all these things. If you were looking for a commonality, that's it. They have to be exactly what they are in order to produce life. That's me and you, and every other form of life we have on this continent. So if they don't believe this, if they don't believe this is evidence of an intelligent designer, just what is their explanation? And here it is. You've heard me use this word before in this class, and it's called the anthropic principle. That is their answer. That's their answer. So what is the anthropic principle? First coined by Brandon Carter in 1973, kind of a new concept. Interestingly, this was during a symposium honoring the 500th birthday of Copernicus. And we talked about the Copernicus principle, which now we believe not to be true, but there was a convention honoring his 500th birthday, and they were just as confused as scientists are today as far as, well, how do we explain this? Because this sure looks like a designer to us. It sure likes this smacks of purpose. So how do we explain this? And Brandon Carter came up with this idea that he coined the anthropic principle. And there's basically two versions of the anthropic principle, but when you hear the anthropic principle, primarily you're thinking of the weak version, or the weak anthropic principle. Because the strong principle just says it's just an attempt to explain why the universe has the age and fundamental physical constants necessary to accommodate conscious life. And for its proponents, it's not unremarkable. It is unremarkable that the universe's fundamental constants happen to fall within a narrow range thought to be compatible with life. No big deal. It's just the way it is. And that's the strong anthropic principle. No big deal. That's just the way it is. What's the weak anthropic principle? Once again, when you see the word anthropic principle or read it, this is what we're primarily talking about. That's what, if somebody doesn't say strong or weak, they're really meaning weak. And there's it is. This is it in a nutshell. A weak anthropic principle argues that only in a universe capable of eventually supporting life will there be beings capable of observing it and reflecting on it. And with the universe not so fine-tuned, it would simply go on unbeheld. So if we had a universe that wasn't so fine-tuned and couldn't support life, no conscious life would know about it anyway. And so it's not remarkable. We're here, so obviously something happened, and so the anthropic principle is the explanation. I use an analogy like this, and those of you that took my class on medical science and Bible ethics a few years ago know how remarkably unlikely it is for anybody in this room to be here. You know, the chances of you being born are not much better than winning a lottery ticket. Maybe worse than that. You can just rationally think about this. First, way back yonder, your great-great-grandparents had to get together. And then your grandparents had to get together, and your parents had to get together, and all kind of factors could have kept that from occurring for you to be born, right? I mean, all that could have. Toby wouldn't be here if I hadn't met his mother, back in Red Bluff, back in the 70s. But anyway, that's not all. When your body, when fertilization takes place, there's literally millions of sperm, and there's thousands of eggs, anyone which could have been fertilized. Point is, it's very unlikely that you're here, but you are. That's the anthropic principle. It's very unlikely that these parameters could have come together, but you're observing them, therefore they did. That sound like a strong argument to you? No, it's not. So we're gonna look at some flaws in the anthropic principle. But now you're educated on what that means. I've mentioned this term before, and it's been kind of a dubious term even for me, but this kind of drove it home what the anthropic principle is. And that's it. It's just the fact that you're here. Doesn't matter how unlikely it would be for you to be here, yet you're here. Universe is here, and it's got conscious life, no matter how unlikely it is. I don't care how many zeros you put in front of that one. So this argument can be used to explain why the conditions happen to be just right for the existence of intelligent life on Earth at the present time. For if they were not just right, then we should not find ourselves to be here now, but somewhere else at some other appropriate time. Roger Penrose. Here's another quote. And this is in defense of the anthropic principle. Martin Rees, astronomist and skeptic. And so he gives an analogy like this. If there was a large stack of clothing and you were rummaging through those clothes, let's say you were a man, you're looking for a coat, and there was hundreds, maybe a couple of hundred coats, and you're rummaging through it, would it be likely that you probably would find one that does fit? Yeah, probably. May not, but probably, unless they all came from one place that were all the same size. And so he says that's the anthropic principle. Say, it's not unusual. It happened. Even if it's rare, it still happened. And he says, if there are many universes, now this is the key to the anthropic principle. This is the key to the anthropic principle. Because if there's only one universe, there's no way the anthropic principle explains it. There's no way. Because it would be totally unacceptable that would all come by happenstance, right? So this is the key. He says, if there are many universes, each governed by a different set of numbers, there will be one where there is a particular set of numbers suitable to life. And guess what? We are the one. So this all falls back on the many universe postulation. And we've talked about this, if you remember, several months ago. That's the many universes hypothesis. So multiverse is purely skeptical and smacks of pure metaphysics. That's come from Lane Craig. There is not 1 ounce of evidence of many universes. Not one. It's the only explanation that makes the anthropic principle make sense. But there's no evidence for it. John Polkinghorne called it pseudoscience and a metaphysical guess. But that's the only way that anthropic principle can make any sense at all, because if only one universe, it does not. And so you can, as you can imagine, the anthropic principle cannot be falsified. And obviously, it's not a scientific principle. It is philosophical. That's what it is. And I love this quote from Roger Penrose. It tends to be evoked by theorists whenever they do not have a good enough theory to explain the observed facts. That's when it's used. It's the anthropic principle. You'll read this in Stephen Hawking's book, Brief History of Time. He talks about the anthropic principle. Mr. Hawkins, Dr. Hawkins, that is no explanation at all. So from my point of view, the anthropic principle is no explanation at all. Just said it. It's one big cop-out. And tantamount to saying if things were different, they would be different. Applying the anthropic principle to the fine-tuning of the universe is far, far, far from a sufficient explanation. Gonzalez and Richards say, what is surprising is not that we observe a habitable universe, but that a habitable universe, so far as we know it, is the only one that exists. They give a familiar analogy to a popular story about a firing squad. I don't think I have that in there. I'm going to have to explain that, so you're going to have to just listen to me, not look at the slide. This is a popular explanation. I can't remember the fellow that came up with it. It wasn't Gonzalez and Richards. But let's say in World War II, an Allied spy was captured by the Nazis, and they're going to put him to death by firing squad. You're going to get 50 of your best sharpshooters that you have in your Nazi army, and you're going to line this fellow up against the wall, and you're going to shoot him. And everybody's got one bullet, and they're your best sharpshooters, and we're even going to make it easy. We're going to put them 10 yards away. They fire the trigger, and nobody hits the target. In fact, not only does nobody hit the target, but what they do find is when the fellow moves, that there's a perfect outline of his body that are made up by the bullet holes that are in the back of the wall. The anthropic principle would say, this is how absurd it was, you shouldn't be surprised by that. The fact that it happened speaks for itself. They all just missed. Now, would anybody buy that story? Of course not. You wouldn't buy that story. They had to miss on purpose for that to occur, which smacks of what? Intelligent design. I think it's a good analogy. There is a big difference between anthropic principle and intelligent design. First, it is not obvious that there are a number of universes, and certainly there's no evidence for it except for the fact that the fine-tuning contradicts the Copernican principle, which it does. Here's the problem in a nutshell. This is from me. No matter how obvious the evidence is for intelligent design, naturalists will never accept it. Just like they will never accept how obvious it is that evolution did not occur. They're just not going to accept it, period. So what do they fall back on? The anthropic principle. Science should be the search for the best explanation, not for the most naturalistic one. And if acceptance of the anthropic principle is their only consideration, this seems to me be irresponsible at best. The anthropic principle offers no causality, but at least intelligent design does. The Copernican principle has failed. Purpose of the last 3 sessions we've had. The universe is fine-tuned, and our planet is uniquely placed in it for life to exist and to allow for discovery, and the best explanation there is God. And I believe it's the God of the Bible. Humankind has no problem discerning design when they see it in nature. Have no problem with that. No scientist has any problem with discerning design when they see it. If a building's put up, if a Boeing 707 is built, we know that was designed. We have no problem seeing that when our faculties are fully functioning. When we're crazy or deluded by naturalism, we have a problem with it. It's a mistake to assume, however, that design argument is only based upon calculations and complexities. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. It's a pattern. William Dembski's Intelligent Design, we talked about this earlier in our class. The pattern is obviously there. It's not just large numbers. It's the presence of the telling pattern, a pattern that we have some reason to associate with intelligent agency, not simply the improbabilities that cause us to believe there's something behind all the fine-tuning. That's Gonzalez and Richards. And from Gonzalez and Richards' point of view, just the fact that we can discover this stuff is more proof for the intelligent designer. So I believe that this was what we see in Romans 1:20, this fine-tuning. I think that's what Romans 1:20 is even talking about. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his internal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that we are without excuse. William Lane Craig. But I think it's indisputable that there has never been a time in history when the hard evidence of scientists is more confirmatory of a belief in God than today. The science evidence is helping us, friends. It's not hurting us, it's helping us. And this is what we're going to end with. We are in a position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many different languages. The child knows someone must have written these books. It does not know how. It does not understand the languages in which they are written. The child dimly suspects a mysterious order in the arrangements of the books, but doesn't know what it is. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of even the most intelligent beings towards God. We see a universe marvelously arranged and obeying certain laws, but only dimly understand those laws. Our limited minds cannot grasp the mysterious forces that moves the constellations. 1929, Albert Einstein. So to me, the anthropic principle is about the weakest excuse I've ever heard of a fine-tuning, but there's probably not going to be a better one. And the only way it makes any sense is multiverse. You know, if I got infinite number of universes, anything's possible. You know, the word or the number infinite is not something we can grasp. It's not even a number. There's nothing infinite. It's not even a number. To say, well, there's infinite number of universes. That's baloney. That's not a number. Anyway, questions. I went through it real fast. I got a little excited there. Any questions or discussion on this? I don't have a lot of time, but if you do, write them down or bring them to class next week and we'll discuss them. Next week we're going to be looking now. This gets us into the old Earth, young Earth that everybody, I think, or a lot of people in this class have been waiting to hear about. We're going to start talking about that, and that's probably going to take us a few weeks. And we'll be looking at sedimentation. How do we get the strata that we have, and is that evidence of a young Earth or old Earth? So thank you for your time.